And now we would like to start the plenary session 2, Biodiversity Assessment, linking global to local. First, let us introduce today's speakers. The Executive Secretary, Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity Ecosystem Services, IPBES, Dr. Anne Larigo-Daly. Doctor will appear through the recorded video. The Associate Professor, Department of Ecosystem Studies at the University of Tokyo, Senior Fellow, IGES, Multidisciplinary Expert Panel Member, IPBES, Lead Author for IPBES, Global Assessment and the Asia-Pacific Regional Assessment, Dr. Hashimoto Shizuka. The Research Manager, Adaptation and Water, IGES, Head of the IPBES TSU on Scenarios and Models, Dr. Pankaj Kumar. And we also have a Program Director, Biodiversity and Forest, IGES, Dr. Andre Mother. And now, I'd like to hand over the microphone to Andre-san for moderation.
Thank you very much. Thank you, and good morning, everybody. So, as you heard in the last session, this one will be about biodiversity. Not so much about biodiversity credits, but that we might touch on that here and there. But the focus is really on biodiversity assessment. And the reason we're focusing on biodiversity assessment is largely because of the important relationship between IGES and IPBES, the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Ecosystem Services, Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. And we'll be talking about the relationship between IGES and IPBES, and also about assessment and the relationship between assessment at different levels. So, assessment is the basis of all the planning and implementation and management that we do. And if you could just go on to the next slide, please. And this happens at various levels. Interestingly, at the national level, there are not that many assessments or really comprehensive biodiversity assessments worldwide. But I happen, and this is just to give this a bit of an international flavor, I happen to come from a country, South Africa, which has been engaging biodiversity assessment for a couple of decades now. So the example that I've given here is an example from South Africa, just some of the graphics around which the whole idea of biodiversity assessment revolves. On the left-hand side of the screen, there are the different ecosystems and different drivers and levels of threat. And then on the top right is a vegetation map of South Africa, which is divided into more than 400 different units, each of which is regarded as a unique ecosystem. And then at the bottom are protected areas and key biodiversity areas. So this is just the kind of information that's provided in a biodiversity assessment. Japan is another country that has engaged in biodiversity assessment. In the next slide, just to point out that at the local level, there's also quite a lot that's been happening. This also goes back more than a decade. This is from a project I was involved in the early 2000s. With ICLE, also another collaborator of IGES. And what we were looking at was collaborating with various cities around the world, as you can see, quite widely spread out, to produce local biodiversity reports, which were essentially assessment reports. So happening at the local level, which is really where policy meets the ground. And then the last slide is indicating the international level of biodiversity assessment. And this is where IPBES comes in, really. So I won't go into all the details, but IPBES negotiations began in Busan in Korea in 2010. IPBES was officially established in Panama City in 2012, not that long ago. So IPBES is a lot newer than the IPCC, which it's often compared to. It's often considered as the biodiversity version of IPCC. And the first and really the most attention-grabbing aspect of IPBES is its assessment of knowledge. And the picture that you can see, or the pictures that you can see on your screen here, are of most of the IPBES assessments that have so far been produced. More than 10 already so far at the regional and global level, some dealing with the geographically, some dealing with different themes or methodologies. So we'll get into that a little bit more. But these global assessments provide quite coarse level data, which is extremely important at that level. But in order to convert that to policy and in order to get down to the local level, this has to be translated into national and local strategies and policies. And so before we get into that specific aspect, I'm going to ask for a video to be played of the Executive Secretary of IPBES, Anne-Larry Gauderie, a longtime friend of Professor Takeuchi and IGES in general. And she'll be giving a bit of an introduction to IPBES and especially the assessment work that, that IPBES is involved with. And she'll also talk about the technical support units, which will also be discussed a little bit further in this session. So with that, I'll hand over to Anne, who's sent us this recorded video message. Might just take a few seconds to transition to that.
Colleagues, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, good morning and greetings from Bonn, Germany, where the IPBES Secretariat is located, and many thanks to the Institute of Global Environmental Strategy, IGES, and to its president, Professor Takeuchi, a longtime friend and supporter of IPBES, for the opportunity for IPBES to participate again in ISAP this year. It's a pleasure to be back. And as many of you will already know, in just about 12 years, IPBES has become the leading authority on providing policy-relevant assessment on biodiversity and nature's contributions to people in response to requests from government. And so the themes, the overarching theme of ISAP 2024 forum is dealing with the simultaneous challenges of multiple global environmental crises, and that directly echoes the priorities of IPBES and of our ongoing work, as well as our planned activities until the end of this decade. IPBES assessments have already demonstrated that nature and nature's contributions to people are degraded at levels unprecedented in human history. And they've also demonstrated that the global biodiversity crisis is at least as urgent and threatening to people as the climate crisis, and that biodiversity loss and climate change are interconnected, mutually reinforcing, and must be addressed together if either one of the two is to be addressed and successfully tackled. The topic for this particular session is biodiversity assessment, linking global to local. And that also resonates with IPBES, because assessments about specific aspects of biodiversity and natures to people are at the heart of our intergovernmental mandate and our work. IPBES harnesses the best available evidence and expertise from a wide range of scientific disciplines and knowledge systems, including indigenous and local knowledge, to provide policy-relevant assessments about the state of knowledge regarding nature, nature's contributions to people, and very importantly, and always, options for action to inform action by decision makers. And you are probably familiar with some of the 11 already landmark assessments that IPBES has completed in its short life. Most recently on invasive alien species and their control, on the diverse values of nature, and on the sustainable use of wild species. And those followed earlier IPBES assessments on pollination and food security, on land degradation and restoration, and also on scenarios and models. And all of those have had major impacts around the world. But it, however, was with the 4 IPBES regional assessments, including the IPBES Asia and the Pacific assessment, and especially the subsequent IPBES global assessment of biodiversity and ecosystem services. It was with this report, and in particular its message, that 1 million species of plants and animals are threatened with extinction, that really elevated the biodiversity crisis to similar levels of priority, of urgency, and awareness as climate change, especially among policy makers. So IPBES is currently very busy with the production of 3 reports, and they will, among others, inform the implementation of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. One of those 3 is what we refer to as the Nexus assessment, which looks at synergies and trade-offs between food, water, health, biodiversity in the context of climate change. And there are risks and opportunities in the way that all of these challenges are tackled. And if tackled separately in silos, that is, we may improve one aspect, but we may intensify problems in other parts of the systems. And so viewed in isolation, we may miss the chances to act in ways that benefit many and even all of these challenges together. So this is the power of biodiversity assessments to help decision makers see the wider range of available options for action in the midst of converging crises. The second assessment that IPBES is busy with is the IPBES Transformative Change Assessment. And here we're looking at all of the indirect drivers of biodiversity change, everything pertaining to what people feel, value, how they behave, all of the determinants of the kinds of changes that are needed to meet the Sustainable Development Goals and the commitments of the Global Biodiversity Framework. And both these 2 assessments, the Nexus assessment and the Transformative Change assessment, will be considered by the 11th session of the IPBES Plenary, which is to meet at the end of this year in Windhoek, Namibia. And finally, the third assessment, which IPBES is currently producing, is focused on business and biodiversity. And here the idea is to look at the types of impacts that businesses have on nature, how those are measured, and the ultimate goal is to support the efforts of the business community to better protect and restore nature and its contributions to people. None of this would be possible without the hard work of the thousands of scientists around the world who commit their time and efforts freely to IPBES, but also none of this would be possible without the hard work of IPBES technical support units. These are smaller offices around the world, usually hosted by an academic institution in different countries, and they are established specifically to support the production of a particular IPBES assessment or a particular IPBES deliverable. And a good example of this was the IPBES invasive alien species assessment, whose technical support unit was hosted here in Japan for the past 4 years by IGES. And we are also very pleased that IGES has recently been selected to host the technical support unit for the IPBES work on scenarios and models. And we look forward to working closely with Pankaj Kumar, who is here, one of the panelists. He's the head of that technical support unit, and we look forward to working with that technical support unit at IGES. So now, and to conclude, I would really like to thank you again for the chance to contribute to this forum and to this session. IPBES assessments of biodiversity and nature's contributions to people are starting to make a difference for biodiversity around the world by raising the level of awareness, of understanding, and also of action regarding biodiversity and nature's contributions to people, but much more is needed. We are together here at this panel, at this meeting. We are working together in our great efforts to strengthen both the science and the policy for nature and people. So I salute my fellow panelists. Professor Shizuka Hashimoto is the co-chair of the multidisciplinary expert panel of IPBES, André, Mader, Pankaj Kumar, again, all of the panelists today are very dedicated contributors to IPBES. I wish you all a very successful panel and a very successful forum, and thank you very much for your attention.
Okay, so there you have a bit of an overview of especially the recent assessments that IPBES has been engaging in. And I'm now going to ask Professor Hashimoto and he has some slides as well, to talk about how this global level, fairly coarse level data links to national level assessment. And he's going to focus on Japan in particular. So over to you, Shizuka.
Thank you, Andre. Yeah, I'm going to talk about national level biodiversity assessment in Japan and how it is influenced by IPBES assessment. So IPBES has 4 functions. It's not working. Oh yeah, okay. Yeah, one of the important function of IPBES is an assessment, which is already introduced by Anlad Godry. So IPBES provide a assessment on different topics on a regular basis, which provide a basis for new policy making. So assessment is one of the important components for the policy support for the national focal points or the member states and stakeholders at the national to international level. But assessment process also identifies some of the knowledge gaps that requires further attention to better decision makings for the future conservation effort. So these knowledge gaps will help funding agencies and scientists to formulate new research effort. Then that effort by the scientists and the government and funding agencies will result in the input for the future IPBES assessment. In this way, they are working closely. And in addition to these 3 functions, IPBES has a 4th function, which is capacity building. They are going to provide an opportunity for the experts from around the world and also opportunity for the government officials, the capacity building opportunity to improve their capacity for doing the assessment and for policy making, which is great. And actually, it's working very well and successful, and which resulted in the formulation of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, which was approved in December 2022. So IPBES provides useful policy-relevant information for the government and international organizations, but still, as far as I have observed, still challenge exists, especially at national to local level. One is a language barrier for those who do not speak English or other UN languages, right? This is especially true for the country like Japan, where not all the people are fluent in English, so they struggle to understand the main findings of the IPBES. Although, IPBES produced a very short summary of the assessment findings as a summary for policymakers. So on a regular basis, the Ministry of the Environment of Japan produced a full translation of the SPM, into Japanese, so that local stakeholders, government officials, and business sectors and civil society organizations can understand up-to-date knowledge about the latest findings, and then which is very useful. And then actually, improving our understanding of the biodiversity and nature contribution to people. The second challenge I have observed is that the ability to provide country-specific policy-relevant information is limited, because the scope of IPBES assessment is mainly focused on global level. So country-level information is actually limited. So although that global level information is very useful to understand the global trend of biodiversity or nature trend and how it influences on the nature's contribution to people. We can also have an improved understanding about underlying causes of the biodiversity decline. But for example, at the global level, one of the important causes of the biodiversity decline is land and sea use changes, underpinned by population growth, urbanizations, and agricultural expansion. But in the case of Japan, of course, land use change has one of the major causes of the biodiversity decline, but which is driven by the population decline and land abandonment. So the situation is completely different from global scale and local or the national level. So we need to have a bit different approach to translate the findings of the global level assessment to national to local level policymaking. The third challenge is capacity building. So although IPBES provided capacity building opportunity for the scientists and government officials throughout its process of the assessment, but the number of participants who can join that capacity building opportunity is limited. So this is one of the reasons why we have a national level biodiversity assessment in Japan. One of such effort, the first such effort was led by the United Nations University for Institute for Advanced Studies. They conducted Japan's Satumi assessment between 2006 and 2010 as part of the follow-up subglobal assessment of the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment. And then this assessment is one-time assessment and it focused mainly on ecosystem services across the country. Then the other national level initiatives of Japan Biodiversity, national level biodiversity assessment is Japan Biodiversity Outlook, which is led by the Ministry of the Environment. This is a sort of official national biodiversity assessment. And then we completed 3 rounds of the biodiversity outlook. First one was conducted between 2008 and 2010, when we had a 10th Conference of Parties of Convention on Global Biodiversity, Biological Diversity in Japan. So at that time, the JBO1 was published. Then, but at that time, since it was before the establishment of IPBES, the assessment focus was primarily set on the biodiversity aspect. So it's not a complete assessment. So after the establishment of IPBES in 2012, this JBO1 was further updated by incorporating the findings of Satumi assessment. Then JBO2 was published, which has a component of biodiversity and ecosystem services. But then one of the challenges at the time is that we have limited capacity to deal with future projections or the scenario analysis to understand the implication of the future uncertainties on nature and nature's contribution to people. So we made several efforts to improve our understanding about future trajectories of nature and nature's contribution to people through research and development effort, and then which resulted in the further update of the JBO2. So we produced the JBO3 in 2021 as a basis for the revision of national biodiversity strategies and action plans. So this shows, how IPBES and national biodiversity assessment and research and development effort are interrelated. So at the international level, IPBES do assessment on a regular basis, which informed the policymaking at the international level, like CBD's Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework was strongly supported by IPBES assessment. And IPBES assessment also provides priority areas that requires further attention from the scientific communities and government. And also they provide an up-to-date knowledge about the state of the nature and nature's contribution to people. And also they provide knowledge gaps. So which becomes a basis for the government to set the framework of the national level biodiversity assessment. So our Japan biodiversity assessment outlook is much influenced by the findings of the IPBES, but at the same time, through this JBO process, we encounter a lot of knowledge gaps. So, and then this information is used to formulate national level research and development effort. And then once the new findings available, the JBO is updated in the second round or the next round of the assessment. So JBO plays a very important role as a scientific basis for the formulation of national biodiversity strategies and action plans. And also it can inform local biodiversity and strategies and action plans. So to fill those knowledge gaps, the Ministry of the Environment has a specific fund to categorize the new knowledge through the participation of quite large number of research institutes and universities across the countries. Then here is a list of several important large-scale projects which was participated more than 10 research institutes and universities, and more than 100 scientists were involved. The scientists from universities and the research institutes from different government organizations. So all together work on the same issues to fill the knowledge gaps. So such process, so this shows a different diagram, the relationship between NBSAP. Then second, middle one is national biodiversity assessment, and the bottom is research and development effort, how they are interconnected through the years. So after the JBO1, we noticed some knowledge gaps about ecosystem services. Then based on the Japan Satemi assessment and other research and development effort, the JBO2 was published, but still we encountered the knowledge gaps, which was further used for the formulation of the research and development project. Then after that, JBO3 was produced. Then JBO3 became the basis for the revision of the national biodiversity strategies and action plans. So like this, so although the assessment by the IPBES is started from the international level, which is effectively influenced on the national level assessment and policy making. And the government is making the great effort to identify knowledge gaps and also fill those knowledge gaps through the participation by the scientific communities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shizuka. So I'll wait until the end of the session for questions. So if you have any for Professor Hashimoto, please just hold them. We will open the floor to questions. We won't be doing it over Zoom, but just for the floor. But after the final speaker, which is Pankaj Kumar, and Pankaj is going to be talking about something slightly different, but in parallel, and there's lots of convergences as well, and that is the establishment of this new technical support unit that you've been hearing about throughout the session. So please go ahead, Pankaj.
Thank you, Andre, and thank you, Hashimoto-sensei, for setting the scene to understand what IPBES is all about and what IPBES is doing, or what a different assessment is going on, and what's the plan ahead. So first of all, good morning, all of you, and dignitaries present off and on the dais. My name is Pankaj Kumar. I'm working as a research manager in the department called Adaptation and Water. In parallel, I'm heading the IPBES technical support unit on scenarios and models. Before being the head of this technical support unit, I had fair amount of experience in different global reports. Say, for example, right now I'm also working as lead author for IPBES Nexus Assessment, as mentioned by Anne. And I'm also a lead author for Global Environmental Outlook 7. Many of our other colleagues from IGES are also contributing to this IPBES Nexus Assessment, as well as transformative changes, as well as the geo assessment. So my topic is basically, I will be narrowing down on the Japan's hosting of the IPBES TSU on scenarios and models. So first of all, I would like to highlight why IGES is important in this aspect. So these are the few points. Say, for example, IGES is strategically located. It is the location of IGES is very much critical. It acts as an agent of change and working as a flag bearer and firm supporter of different global assessment, whether it's IPBES, whether it's IPCC, GEO, etc. And it represents key Asia-specific reasons in different platforms, policy dialogues, and negotiations. If I look into the past history, what IPBES has hosted different TSU or task force unit on different themes, then it has a long history, and it started from January 2015, June 2015, when it started hosting the TSU on Asia Pacific Regional Assessment, which ended in 2019. And from that onward, as Anne mentioned as well, that TSU on invasive alien species was one of the most successful TSU like supporting the activity of IPBES Secretariat, which started in February 2019. And although it ended in March 2024, but as Hashimoto Sensei mentioned, that in order to implement or the ground reality, implement the assessment reports and integrating into the ground reality, we need to translate all those findings into the local knowledges and languages. And that's why we have to translate many of the outputs, especially the summary for policymaker in the local languages. And that's why we got an extension of 6 months, and those SPM are being translated into different local languages. And now it will be ending in August 2024. And from March 24, Japan got that bid and won that bid to host the TSU on scenario and model. And IGES is the host for that one. And our predecessor was a PBL in Netherlands, which ended in 2023, March 2024. So a part of IPBES related things, IGES is also hosting a task force on IPCC on national greenhouse gas inventions. When we are talking about the timeline for IPBES task force on scenario and model for biodiversity and ecosystem services, it is mainly divided into 3 timelines. First is IPBES methodological assessment of scenarios and model of biodiversity and ecosystem services, which spanned from 2014 to 2016. And it produced the assessment of the use of scenario and models of biodiversity and ecosystem services. And then it leads to start of the IPBES expert group on scenario and model, which started from 2016 and ended in 2019, where the idea for nature future framework has originated. And then different scientific groups and policymakers, they work together. And then they had developed the scratch idea what the future of nature looks like or should look like for different policymaker, business group, and different stakeholders. And then we need to further refine this methodological framework. And that's why the phase 3 started from 2016 and ended 2019 and ended it in 2023, where the nature future framework was further refined, and the nature future framework scenarios has been developed, the framework was defined how to develop these scenario in the ground. And now from that onward, however, these are all existing in the theory only. For the future iteration and for its ground implementation, we need a TSU which can support these activities further. And that's why from March 2014 onward, TSU on scenario and model has been started in IGES, where our main activity will be future iteration and implementation of nature future framework at different scales, systems, and regions. The key responsibility for TSU at IGES will be divided into 3 groups mainly. First is provision of support on scenario and models for IPBES assessments, where we will be mainly providing the support for peer review of existing and new IPBES assessments, mobilizing expert on scenarios and models, providing advice and input to IPBES assessment author groups, and organizing an in-person workshop to better account for different knowledge system, especially ILK, that is indigenous local knowledges. And we will be organizing a joint workshop in second quarter of 2025. And when we are looking into the second objective, that is promoting dialogue between IPBES and the community of practice. Here, community of practice refers to different stakeholders, whether it is business group or policy making or NGO or CBOs or local community-based organization. So what we intend to do here is like mobilizing existing community and advocate them what Nature Future Framework is all about. Providing the guidance and information, collecting the example of best possible way to implement the Nature Future Framework in the ground, engagement with the climate and other scenario and model communities, foster coherence and facilitate the exchange of ideas of the Nature Future Framework, and whether there is a scope for further improvement of the guidance, methodological guidance, which we have proposed so far, and engaging with the various stakeholders to disseminate, discuss, and further develop this framework, and provide the update of Nature Future Framework methodological guidance in IPBES Plenary 12. And C, that is third component, that is developing and monitoring a set of relevant indicators for measuring effectiveness. Although we have developed a set of work which we have to do in due course of time, but we have also intend to develop the indicator which will provide us a clear idea whether we are progressing or not. Say, for example, in case of SDGs, although we have a timeline and we have a goals, but without an indicator, it's hard to see whether we are progressing significantly or not, or what's the lacuna behind. So that's why the idea is to set a effectiveness indicator here. And basically, this is our team. We have 15 task force members. We have 2 fellows. And among 4 management committee members, we have Hashimoto Sensei as a MAPE member, which was already highlighted by Anne. And in the TSU, along with me, we have Noriko, Naoko, and Ms. Finn. So that is all from my side. I'll be happy to answer if you have any question. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Pankaj, and thank you both for putting a lot of information into a short amount of time there. We do have a bit more than 10 minutes for questions, and I've got a couple of my own, either to get us going if necessary or to fill the gaps, but I'd really like to open to the floor first of all. If anyone would like clarification on anything or would like to dig a little bit deeper into any of the issues that we've been exploring here. So can you just show by way of raising your hand if anybody has one? There's a roving microphone around, so I'll just have a quick scan. If I don't see any hands in the first few seconds, then I will ask a couple of my own questions to warm you up a bit. Okay, I don't see any yet, but please do, don't be shy. Please do. So, okay, just to get started, I just wanted to ask Shizuka a quick question about, I remember he was talking about the relationship between IPBES as a global assessment process and assessment at the national level. And Shizuka, something that we both touched on, and Pankaj as well, was the existence of these methodological assessments, of which scenarios and models was one. And methodological assessments are kind of unique. There's only a couple of them, 3 so far, if I remember correctly, in IPBES. But these are assessments that are not so much providing information, but providing the means to assess. And I wanted to ask you whether Japan has had sort of a special use for these methodological assessments, which is different to the general use of IPBES assessments, using them for the actual methodology of assessment in Japan.
Thank you, Andre. Yeah, methodological assessment, as you mentioned, this is assessment of the methodologies. For the first one was methodological assessment of scenario models, and the second one was the methodological assessment on diverse conceptualization of different values of nature's contribution to people. And the third one is ongoing, which focus on business and biodiversity. Then those methodological assessments are particularly useful, especially for the scientists, to understand the state-of-the-art knowledge about the methodologies, and then and also it also provides common terminologies that will help scientists and government officials to communicate smoothly when we talk about some specific technical matters. So I think it's not only, it's not specific to the methodological assessment, but basically IPBES assessment, including the methodological assessment, providing a very foundation of the common understanding between scientists and policymakers. We often use the terminologies used by IPBES assessment, and then that will help because we are coming from different, even the scientists comes from different, background, right? Some has ecology background, some has policy background, social sciences, and then so by using the same terminologies and then based on the assessment, including the methodological assessment, facilitate our communications. Thank you.
Just wanted to follow up a little bit on that very important point about terminology. I think it's maybe something that's overlooked. The importance of it is overlooked. Before IPBES, which has only existed for 12 years now, there was no standardized global way of looking at biodiversity assessment. And therefore, you'd have peer review papers coming from all over the place, UN policy-related documents, all sorts of different sources, and very little consensus on how to talk about some of these issues and some of these terms. And IPBES has very quickly become recognized as the source for these terms. Of course, IPBES is a mechanism for gathering existing data. They don't go out to conduct empirical research. It's a case of gathering and compiling data. So very important from that point of view, this point of view of standardization. Okay, I'm just going to see if anyone has a question before I move on to, I don't want to be the only one asking questions. We have one near the front here. Yeah. If you could maybe please identify yourself before asking the question.
最近ですけど、今は気候ネットワークとここのISAP他にも入ってます。最近ですけど、一つ
well, related to IGES. In 1999, from 1999, Eco-Asia, Asia Pacific Environmental Conference ended in 1995. There was the Global Energy Conference, Energy, Biodiversity, and for 5 years from 1995, from 1999, excuse me, the project started in relation to the environmental conference. Is there anything that you're aware of regarding these projects? Thank you.
Would you like to address that question to a particular member of the panel? To anybody?
No, anybody. To the extent possible.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the question. I
would like to answer in English.
So for Japan Biodiversity Outlook, which is led by the Minister of the Environment, we have an opportunity to invite comments from different organizations. So maybe through those channels, I think we can interact with the organization you mentioned to incorporate some of the views and the knowledge into the national level assessment. But I think to my knowledge, I think there is little we need a greater effort to make a specific linkage between biodiversity and climate change and the energies. And one of the important work, it's ongoing by IPBES, is the nexus assessment. So nexus assessment pays attention to the nexus between biodiversity, energy, food, water, and health. And then this will bring us, I think, this will be approved in December this year. And then once this summary for policymakers is approved, we have much better understanding about the interrelationship between energy, climate, and biodiversity, along with other components like food and health and waters. So I am expecting that the production of this SPM will have a significant impact on the next round of JBO and also on the national level research endeavors. Thank you.
Thank you, Shizaka, for also, and our questioner for bringing in the synergy aspect. We've spoken about biodiversity a little bit in isolation so far, but as Shizaka mentioned, this nexus assessment is one which really brings biodiversity in contact with these various other areas. There has been another effort made, especially from the IPBES side, to coordinate, especially with climate. So there was an IPCC IPBES workshop in 2021, I think it was. And they produced a sort of an unofficial report, not the same kind of report as the ones that you saw here. It wasn't sanctioned by parties in the same way, but nevertheless, kind of a stock taking of the relationship between biodiversity and climate change, which is, I think, a very important document. And IPBES is seeking to collaborate further with IPCC in this regard. I have actually a related question on that for Pankaj, but let me just see if anyone else has a question before I ask, because we probably only have time for one or two more. Okay, I don't see any hands right now. Pankaj, I just wanted to ask, you mentioned you're kind of interacting with the climate community on scenarios and models. Can you say a little bit more about that? I mean, is there anything in particular that's planned from TSU, from a technical support unit point of view?
So say, for example, scenario and models are not very new in IPBES community or different global assessment. What is new, what IPBES is promoting right now is Nature Future Framework. And Nature Future Framework is not very typical scenarios and model where we have, say, for example, exploratory scenarios or target seeking scenarios. The Nature Future Framework gives a particularly unique presenting a particularly unique features where we need to seek the target in different times and space. And that is why we need to communicate with different communities dealing in the climate change as well as different global assessment in order to seek what kind of indicator or what kind of target we need to keep in mind in order to make it feasible to implement in the ground. And say, for example, when we are having different kind of drivers and pressures in order to set up the model, that time it's very difficult if a person is very naive in the field of scenarios and model. So first of all, we have to negotiate in order to see whether it's feasible or not. And that's why although it's already the methodological guidance is available in theory, but implementing in the ground, we have to deal with different scientific communities and see what are the challenges ahead for implementing this Nature Future Framework. And that's why we are one of the mandate for this TSU is to deal with different ongoing assessment or future assessment and seek whether we can organize some joint workshop in order to discuss these very critical issues about dealing all the challenges ahead for us in order to implement NFF in the ground.
Thank you, Pankaj. And yeah, I think that's a good place to end, because the whole scenarios and models idea in biodiversity came very much from the climate community, from the IPCC. And I think that a big part of the Nature Futures framework, as far as I understand, is to use that basis to develop models that are specifically relevant to biodiversity. So we've got the basis, but there's quite a huge challenge to translate these models, which are different in so many ways, especially the fact that climate measures tend to be global and general, whereas biodiversity measures tend to be much more local. So this is one of the big challenges, I think, that needs to be overcome. Okay, with that, I think unless there's any burning question, we have 11 seconds remaining, and I don't see any hands. So I think that's probably a good place to end. I'd just like to thank the panelists one more time, and also all of you for listening. Thank you very much.